Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness Initiative. This episode is sponsored by the Finest Service Organization, a provider of line-of-duty death loan protection through many of our POCUA institutions. I am Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and I have another really fun episode. I got a couple of my podcast friends, much like you had seen in the last couple episodes. I had the perfect opportunity to interview both of these folks at CrimeCon. They are the Prosecutors, and if you're not listening to the Prosecutors, you need to listen to that podcast. Even more so, they will be featured in Podcast Magazine coming up in the November issue, so grab a copy of that. And, just one more point, we have not had, to my knowledge, any prosecutors on this particular show. So this is going to be a nice and interesting and intriguing angle. Alice, Brett, hosts of the Prosecutors, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having us.
It is awesome, and it is my pleasure to be able to talk to you guys again. Listening to your show, having the chance to sit down with you for about an hour and a half at CrimeCon. I learned so much. And I think that the first and obvious question, being prosecutors, I'm assuming you're working a little bit more than, 20, 30 hours a week. You're not quite quitting. You got full-time jobs. What in the heck possessed you to do a podcast on top of that?
Alice twisted my arm. I couldn't say no. She forced
it's quite
me to
the
do
opposite.
Did you ever get your shoulder realigned from that twist? Because I've met her in person. She's a tough person.
You don't say no to Alice. I think that's everybody knows.
Also,
that.
quite literally half Brett's size, but funny that you asked that.
But you pack a punch.
Well, thank you for that. Well, no, that's a great question. And, we do have full-time jobs, full-time families. We both have young children. But, we really saw a void in the true crime world. There are just really countless podcasts out there in the true crime realm, especially. But we noticed that, people kind of brought up the same questions. They wanted to understand why investigative steps were taken. They wanted to understand, why certain things were happening or not happening in trials and investigations. And oftentimes there was a lot of people who had no actual knowledge about the law, just pontificating or worse, kind of attacking law enforcement or the prosecution or even the defense for things that actually have a really simple answer rooted in the law, the Constitution, in things that we think basic civics, should be known to everybody. And so we thought, we do this on a daily basis. We love this stuff, and we think that we can actually be educating people to make them better, civic citizens, in not only understanding true crime, but understanding the society that they live in.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, and it's really important for what everybody who listens to this does. It's important that people have some basic understanding of the system and how it works, and they have some faith in it, some trust in it. Because if they don't, and everybody knows this, whether you're a prosecutor or law enforcement or anything, if the citizenry doesn't trust you and they don't understand and they think you're not on their side, you're against them, it makes your job really hard, and it makes it really hard to protect them. And so that opportunity to sort of just give some people some insight. I mean, I remember I read something, or I was listening to something, and they were talking about how this investigator must have not have known what he was doing, because the last question he would ask everybody was, is there anything I should have asked you? And they just thought that was the dumbest question. And in reality, that's pretty much the last question that every investigator asks any witness, just to make sure there's not anything else out there. But they didn't know that, right? I mean, they were completely ignorant of that. And I think having that opportunity to sort of just shine a little bit of light on what happens behind the scenes was something that we really wanted to do. And we love this stuff anyway, so why not talk about it outside of work?
Yeah. I remember listening to the first episode of the Prosecutors that I had ever personally listened to. And it was actually on the drive from Los Angeles to Vegas to go to CrimeCon and see you folks. And I remember thinking, it's like, wow, this is really different. and intriguing. Now, I don't know if I'm intrigued because I'm nuts and I actually like this stuff too. But as I found out in CrimeCon when you almost got tackled by a bunch of fans, that there's a lot of people that are intrigued by this, and I think that's a good thing. I really like your education slant. It's like, how many people, come up to you and say, wow, I never thought of that, or, wow, I find this really interesting. Do you ever have anybody come up and say, wow, you're boring as crap?
Yeah, my family all the time.
But that's because they hear this stuff all the time.
And look, I mean, that's what we thought was going to happen. When we started doing it, we were very sort of shy about talking too much about the law and too much about the process. But we talk about it a little bit, and then people were like, we want to hear more of that. Like, tell us more of that. And so we've started incorporating it more and more. And now we even have a second podcast, which is really a lot about that kind of stuff. And I think the fact that there are so many people out there hungry to hear this stuff is a really good thing. It shows that people want to know how this stuff works. They want to understand the system and the process.
And that's so true, because we would joke in our episodes early on. We'd say, okay, guys, here's the law nerd part. We're going to try to make it quick, and then we'll zoom past it. And it was really the law nerd stuff that we would get all these emails about, saying, actually, can you teach me more about what 404B means? That's a very specific statute, that people wanted, a specific rule of evidence that people wanted to know about. And what we found was that people wanted to know this stuff, and it makes total sense. The law and court opinions and everything that happens in our judiciary is supposed to be accessible to the common person. And that's why juries are made up of your peers. They're not made up of lawyers or judges or people who've passed some sort of licensure to be able to be on a jury. The whole purpose is these are the laws that we all live by, so we should be able to understand it. It should be accessible to us. And we get these really awesome emails from people who say, I got my first jury summons today. And for the first time, I was excited because I understood what was being asked of us. I understood the import. I understood what was at stake here. And I understood my role as a citizen. And I got to educate, my veneer of 50 or 60 other potential jurors on what we were doing. And everyone was very excited. And to see kind of the person who previously maybe didn't understand the law turn into the teacher is, that's incredible, because, we can talk all day long into a microphone, but if people don't really take it to heart and begin to understand the society around them better, then that's really the reward we have right there.
Yeah, agreed. I'm not intrigued enough to want to know even what the hell 404B statute is. But I would like to think, and I think I'm not patting myself too much on the back, but having done work with law enforcement for 20 years and having covered true crime for now about 3 years, that while I may bluntly not know as much as your avid listeners, or you two, since you actually have law degrees, but I think I know more than the average person. And so it'll be funny, I'll be watching something with my wife, like your typical Dateline or Snapped or, one of these things. And she's a highly intelligent person, more intelligent than me. But, she'll say, well, why did they do that? Why did the prosecutor do this? Or why did they do that? And I'll say, well, I could understand why you're upset, but that's not the law. There's a reason why, like, for instance, in one of the shows that I just watched, they brought somebody in on a real small warrant. But, you bring them in on something stupid and little because you could hold them for a little while, and then you can gather evidence while this person's actually incarcerated for a little while. So I think, having some of that basic knowledge, is a damn good thing in our society.
No, we agree 100%. I mean, and I think and one thing that we come back to a lot is there is just so much, in my opinion, unjustified distrust of police, prosecutors, the courts, everything. And there's just a drumbeat of that. And we don't try and go into this with an agenda, and we're not trying to convince anybody of anything. We just want to sort of lay out the facts and why things happen the way they do, and point to the law and point to why certain people are doing certain things, so that people can sort of come to their own conclusion. And that just doing that, I think, sets us apart from a lot of people who do, I think, have an agenda, and it's an agenda that I don't think is very good for society in general, and particularly if you want to make sort of, community safer, and if you want to make the job of police safer. So that's another thing that we try and do.
Yeah, I mean, something that we do that not a lot of, some podcasts do this, but not everyone does it. We put all of our firsthand resources on our website, so we have trial transcripts, we have the police reports, everything that's available publicly. We try to compile it and we say it. Don't take our word for it. We've read these sources so that we can report from the source, but you need to go read it as well. If you're hearing all these headlines like, police lied in their report, go read the report, go try and figure out what they're trying to say. And, our second podcast that Brett mentioned, Prosecutors Legal Briefs, the purpose of that one, besides, educating more deeply on the law, is actually to try and debunk a lot of these clickbait articles that they sell clicks, and it's great, but it doesn't quite tell the story. And that does do a disservice, because those clickbait articles, a lot of people just look at the headlines and they kind of get into a frenzy about the state of our judicial system, and there's so much more behind it, and there's usually a lot of falsity in those clickbait articles, and we try to debunk it and show you where you can find the answer. And it takes a little bit more digging, but it's good to know what the truth is behind it.
Now a word from one of the POCUA's proud business partners, OfficerPrivacy.com. OfficerPrivacy.com was founded by Pete James, a law enforcement professional with over 25 years of experience. Pete wanted to find a way to help law enforcement officers protect themselves and their families. So he formed a team to create a way to quickly identify and remove their information from certain sites. OfficerPrivacy.com is the result. This service is already offered through a select few of our POCUA organizations. As a listener of Public Safety Talk Radio, you can take advantage of a special offer from OfficerPrivacy.com. Go to OfficerPrivacy.com/POCUA, and when you sign up, you'll get 2 additional bonuses. In addition to removing your personal information from the top 30 people search sites, they will give you your first 2 months of monitoring free. This is a value of $39.98. In addition to that, you'll receive a cell phone privacy device, a $19.99 value. This prevents data from leaving your cell phone when you use public charging stations and is a must when traveling. So go to officerprivacy.com/POCUA today to take advantage of this offer and to protect your privacy. Organizations who are members of the POCUA and are interested in offering the service directly to their members, contact us at POCUA@btcinc.org. In writing the article that'll come out in November, I went back to the recording, and Brett, you were in there every once in a while, but there was like a half-hour diatribe by Alice on critical thinking that I really, really enjoyed. And unfortunately, I found a way to condense the most salient points into the article. But I love what you say about critical thinking. And yeah, I believe in our society, there's so much knowledge that's available, but there's very little wisdom. And for people to take that and then take it to the next step. For instance, I really appreciated what you talked about in terms of the police. And being a supporter of law enforcement, I'm not a blind supporter. You do something wrong, you do something outside the law, I'm going to call you on it. But within the law, there's certain things that do make sense. And I'll use an example. I mean, here in California, a number of years ago, some California Highway Patrol officers got caught fudging overtime. Well, that's wrong. I'm a taxpayer. I pay that. That's a big problem, and we're supposed to trust you guys. That is a huge, huge issue that I'm going to call you out on. But those 2 cops in Atlanta a couple years ago, if you remember that case, I think somebody fell asleep in a car in a Wendy's. And they treated him with very, very high respect and treated him like a human being. And then he stole one of the officers' tasers and started shooting back at him. Well, officers have a right under the law to protect themselves, and that's a weapon. So he got shot. And, these are things that people, need to understand, the common sense, critical thinking, understanding that every situation isn't cookie cutter like the other. And I love what you're passing along in terms of, and I think you even said that, don't just take our word for it. If you want to dig in and challenge us, be a critical thinker, go ahead, but, have the facts, have some logic behind it. Yeah. I don't know if there's a question in my ramble, but yeah, that was, that was top of mind in the conversation that I had with you two.
Yeah, no, we'll take compliments all day long. You can talk as long as you want on those. But I think that's exactly right. We have most access to information than we've ever had in history. And you have a lot of people talking at you, but not a lot of people asking you to think for yourselves. And it's a muscle. Your brain is a muscle that has to be exercised. Being a critical thinker is something that you can get better at over time. And we try to do this throughout our episodes. That's why we explore multiple theories through all of our cases. Even if we think a theory can be debunked, we want to present it first because you may have a different point of view and we want you to be able to have access to that theory and then think for yourself. And we see this all the time. We'll have people in our fan page group say, oh no, Brett and Alice are going to be so mad at me because I disagree with their outcome. And we're like, whoa, we think you completely misunderstand us. We want you to challenge us because in no way do we think Brett and Alice have all the answers. We talk and we discuss and we try to give people an insight into how we reach our conclusions. It's like a math proof, right? You're trying to show all your work as opposed to that clickbait article that just says, this is the conclusion. And so by showing you how we think and how we've been trained to think as lawyers, we're hoping that you learn from these, ways that people are asked to think over time. And if you find fault in it, to absolutely dig in and challenge us.
And I think part of that also is having respect for people you disagree with, which I think is so important. It seems more and more these days, there is this notion that if I disagree with you, then you must have, or one of us has a moral failing. Yeah. I mean, if I'm right and you're wrong, then you're an immoral person and we can't disagree as friends and we can't debate issues and we can't talk about facts and see how we come out. And I think the part of the sort of critical thinking, when you look at things, you can see the other side, even if you disagree with it. Even if you look at a court case and you think, man, this should have gone the other way because when I look at the evidence, I don't see that there's enough to convict this person, right? And you think there is enough evidence. Well, both of us can have that view without you thinking, since you think there's enough evidence, you must be corrupt or you must be biased in some way against this person, or this must be about politics or whatever, right? And personally, I mean, I just think in today's society, if you are thinking critically about things, I also think it lowers the heat a little bit and it enables us to be what I feel like we've been for basically the entirety of the country, which is people who can disagree, but still, understand that doesn't mean that you're a bad person or I'm a bad person. And so that's another thing that we try and do. And I think we see that some on the fan page. I mean, we see people having these sort of disagreements where they aren't disagreeable, where they aren't yelling and screaming at each other. And that's something that I'm proud of as well.
Well, maybe you're starting a new trend with the prosecutors. I proudly, both on this show and in other circles, label myself as a moderate Republican. And I am very pleased that many of my friends are moderate Democrats. And many times we find it's like, 70 to 90% of the stuff, we're kind of on the same page. There's like 10 or 20% that, all right, well, we'll just agree to disagree, but there's logic behind our reasonings. And we'll just stay away from that. But there's, always seems to be that one moderate Democrat that wants to say, all right, I agree with you 95%, but I'm going to stick in that 5% realm and not like you. But to get to an actual question, to get it back to your show and the great things that you're doing, it to kind of tie that in, it seems to be difficult for some people to really embrace the facts. Why do you think that is? Because some things just, I mean, facts are facts, right? I mean, I'll call on Alice on this one because you dug into this in the interview, and then Brett will come back to you eventually. But yeah, Al, why do people, in your opinion, seem to have such a problem sometimes embracing simple facts?
I really can't remember what I said in the interview. So if this is like completely opposite with what I said earlier, you can just call BS on the previous answer.
Okay. Yeah. We'll just pull the article. It's early enough. We just won't have a true crime section in Podcast Magazine November. Go ahead.
Kind of like what Brett was saying. Part of the point of what we're trying to do is to make sure that there's dialogue, even when you disagree with someone, to have civil dialogue. Mm-hmm. And so the first part is that I don't think people want to ignore facts. I think, especially in the true crime realm, people feel very passionately about these cases, and there's a lot to be passionate about. Wrongful convictions, absolutely, that's something to be passionate about. Victims' rights, absolutely something to be passionate about. And I think sometimes when people are left to their own devices and don't fully understand the parameters of the judicial system or what the police are doing, they can begin to see and shade, their passion is kind of shaded by it. If they think, oh, there's a wrongful conviction here, therefore all law enforcement is always out to frame individuals in a particular, subgroup of people. Yeah. And that can cause, those passions are important, and they have led to massive and great changes for individual defendants in cases, for victims, and it has led to some great change in the true crime world. But I think some of that passion can cause blinders to be put on. And that happens to every single one of us. We are all susceptible to bias and to blinders that we're not aware of. But that's why healthy and civil discussion is so important, because we're able to help each other see what our biases are and what our preconceived notions are that might not be completely fair in shaping the issue. And so I think that's a very trying to put a positive spin on it as to why people
Appreciate
actually do that. And why that is because we also say this in a lot of our cases. If there's some sort of question as to what happened in a particular true crime story, there's going to be all these facts, and it's going to be impossible to fit all of the facts into the case, because there's going to be a lot of extraneous and just unimportant facts that we don't know are unimportant because we don't know what actually happened. And so what you're supposed to do in an investigation is put all the chips on the table, try to figure it all out. And so when people are trying to fit all of these puzzle pieces into a picture that may not actually involve that puzzle piece, there's a lot of disagreement as to what those facts are. And so sometimes in reality, a fact really can be dismissed because it has nothing to do with the case at hand. But which of those facts can be, extracted is a really hard question. And so I think that's where a lot of the debate comes in, and it's a valid debate. And I think it comes from a good place, but it can lead to sometimes intense, discussions.
This has been part 1 of our interview with the prosecutors. Part 2 of our interview with the prosecutors will air next week in episode 92 of Public Safety Talk Radio. Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.